Today we're going to be looking at global state management in React, and we're going to be using the context to do this. So let's dive right into it. So what exactly is meant by global state management? Global state is basically state that you make globally available, hence the name, for any component in the component tree to have access to that state without having to prop draw. So let's just take a quick look at this detailed example. Okay, so there are two especially important hooks to understand when we are working with the context as our global state. And these two hooks are use context and use reducer. So let's just quickly take a step back and look at two small implementations of each one of these hooks, how they actually function and how they are used, so that we can understand how the combined effect with the two of these hooks help us create this global state management workflow. So let's start with the use reducer hook. So the use reducer hook is basically the exact same as the use state hook, which is used to manage state inside of a component. But the use state is more for simple state management, for like changing or two-way binding in an input element, or those type of stuff. Use reducer, on the other hand, is more used for complex state. So if you want to do more changes with one different action, use reducer is a better option for this. So let's take a look. I have a very basic example here. I have a use reducer example. All of this code will be linked down in the description for the GitHub. And I'm just going to run through what I have here. So this has no functionality as of yet, so I can press these buttons and nothing will happen. So what the idea behind this is we have a count state that we want to manage, but we want to be able to input a variable and then initialize this count value, and then by pressing these buttons we can increment and decrement this count value. So let's take a look how this will work. So firstly, what we will do is we'll go at the top, we'll import use reducer, the hook, from React, and then we can initialize this. We can destructure it, array destructuring, and this will give us two things. It will give us state and a function called a dispatch. And then we can set this equal to the use reducer hook, and then we pass in two things to the use reducer. We can pass in the reducer function. So reducer function, I'm just naming this the reducer function. You can name this whatever you'd like, and then some initial state. I'm just going to call this initial state. So at the top we can go and create these two things. I can say const reducer function is equal to an arrow function, and this arrow function takes in two parameters. The first one being state, and the second one being some type of action. And we'll come to the body of this function just in a second. Then the second thing we passed in was this initial state. So I'm just going to call this initial state, and this is just going to be an object that contains our count value we want to manage. So now we can pass, this function is passed in right over here, and this initial state is passed right in over there. So this reducer function works as follows. We usually do it in a switch statement, and we will dispatch this dispatch function. We'll dispatch different actions to this reducer function to manage or handle the state in different ways. So let's start. Action.type. So this is going to check the type, and let's say the type of this action that is dispatched is increment. And when we get this action of this string identifier, we want to spread the state that is passed into the reducer function, and then we want to manipulate the count inside of the state. So we say state.count plus 1. So this would increment this initial state that is passed in over here. So now we can do the following for decrement. We can say decrement and do the same. We will return the new state we spread the current state. You don't have to do it with only one variable inside, but it's just good practice to remember to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't mutate. You will overwrite the entire state. So here you can say state.count -1. And then usually with a switch statement, we default the value for in case none of the string identifiers were used. So we'll just send back the state and do nothing with it. So now we have finished the useReducer function that we have passed to this reducer hook, useReducer hook. And now on this dispatch function that was destructured from this hook, we have access to this reducer function to manipulate this state right over here. So let's quickly bind this state to our buttons. So if I say on click right over here, and on this on click I want to activate some anonymous function that dispatches an object that contains a type, because in this reducer I'm looking for action.type. So this action will be sent from the dispatch, and the .type will be set right over here. So we can set this type equal to increment, and then we can do the same for the decrement part. We can dispatch an object of type decrement, just like this. So if we save this and go back, we can see it's still 0, but this is not the 0 that is initialized in the state because we hard-coded the 0 in here. So now, in the state that is destructured from the useReducer, we have access to that state. So we can say state.count. And if we save this, it should give us 0 as well. So now we have 0 there as well. So now, these two buttons should increment and decrement this state. So if I say increment, we can see that the counter is counting up. If I decrement, we can see the counter is counting down. But now, let's say I want to send some value to the state and update it based on whatever that value is. We can do that as follows. I have a label here that says starting count, and then an input for the user to type in a number, and then I just set the on change onto this use state right over here. So let's get started with that. So once I press this initialize counter button, I would like to send off a different action. So this action we can create in the switch. We can say init count for initializing the count, and we can return the current state. We spread the current state, and then we take the count value and set this count value equal to the action dot payload. So this action, once again, is whatever is dispatched, and this payload will set on the dispatch value. So here where we set the type value, we can add another dispatch or a payload value. This is, you'll usually see this in Redux, which is also state management. So let's see if this works. So on the button, we'll also have an on click. And here we want to dispatch an object of type, we named it init count. And we can pass to this object another key value pair called payload. And in this payload, we pass in the input value. So this input value is equal to this use state input value that it just binds this counter. So with this done, we can check it out in the browser. We can initialize the value to 15, and there we can see the state was updated to 15, and now we can press these individual dispatches to manipulate the state. So this is basically the workings of useReducer. So the next hook we're going to look at is use context. So let's dive into that. So what exactly is context? Context is a way of sharing data. So this is how the global side of the context as global state comes into play. So the reducer is more to manage and manipulate the state, where the context is used to be wrapped around all of the components that needs access to this specific state. So what I have here is a really simple application. I'm just quickly going to run through what I already have here. It's just a basic application. Context example, this would be on GitHub as for the previous one. And it's just two links with the React router DOM, which links to two different components. So the first one is the home component, and it only says this is the home page, and then the feed link just takes us to the feed page. So it's really simple, but the idea behind this is we want to have some state that is available between both of these components. So let's dive right into how the context works. So when I use context, I usually go into my source file and I create a new folder called context, so that I know all of the context state or things I want to share is in this folder. So I go and I create a app-context.js file, and in this file I create my context. So this is 3 lines of code. This is really simple, and we do it as follow. We say import some value from React, and this value is create context. It's literally in the name, and then we create this context. So we can say const app context is equal to create context. So this we just imported, and we initialize this as a function. So we can pass in here some initial value. If you click on it and do it like so, you can default any value. So we're not going to do that, but you can enter any default value you would like. And then we just export this variable app context. So now we have access to this context in all of our application where we import it. So this is the first part. The second part is in the context file, we create our state. So I call this app state.js, and this should be in capital letters because this is going to be the component. So here we can just use the snippet RAFCE and create the functional component. And here we'll import this context we just created. So we name this app context, and in capital letters because we're going to use this for a component, and we import that app context. Now when we return, we don't return this div, we will return the app context, and on this context we give it a provider. And this is what I said in the example previously. This provides all of the components in a componentry access to this values we're going to place in this context. So then we pass in as prop to this component some value object, and inside of this object we can share state, or we can share different values. So I'm just going to hard code a value in here called message. This is from the context, and I'm going to import the props because this is going to wrap all of the app component. So in between this JSX return component right over here, we just insert the following props.children. So this will allow all of the wrapped components to have access to this value or whatever is inside of here. So let's go test this out. With this done, let's go to our app component, and we will import this app state from the context folder and then the app state file. And now we use this app state as a component, which it is, because you can see this app state is just a functional component that has the context as its JSX that is returned. So now we can wrap whatever we'd like to have access to this values with this component. So we would like the following two things to have access. These two routes. So whatever is routed also has access. So these two components that are rendered, the homepage component, which is this one, and then the feed component, which is this one. So we're going to wrap the switch statement with a app state component, just like this. And if we save this and we go into each one of these, so we'll go into the components and we'll go into the home component. And here we would like access. We want to print that message inside of this p tag. So in order to do this, this is where the use context hooks come into play. So we can say at the top, we can say use context. And then we import this context, so that 3-lined piece of code file. So we can say app context from, we'll go outside into the context folder and import that app context file. And now we use the hook. We can say const and destructure anything out of whatever is in use context, which is that message variable, and we pass this app context. So now we are telling this hook, okay, we want access to this app context, and this app context is created in here. So this gives us access to this. So with this done, we can destructure out of the app context this message that was passed into the app state. So we can destructure this out. By just doing this simple line, we now have access to that message value. So we can print this message value out in the p tag. And if I save this and I go to my home page, I can now see this message being printed out. It's as simple as that. I can see this message being printed out. Now we can do the exact same for the feed page. So now we can share different state between this. So I can do something that manipulates the state from the home page, and it will update and be shown inside of the feed page. So let's quickly make sure it works in the feed page as well. So I'm going to close the home page. It's exactly the same as with the home page. Go into the feed page. We'll import the use context hook, and then we'll import the actual context that was created. And then we'll initialize this use context. So we can say use context is equal to that app context, and this will be destructured, object destructured, because we pass in an object, so we can get that message here as well. And save. So now I can once again add a p tag over here and just place that message right inside there, like this. So now on both of these pages I have access to that shared state from a different component. So this is very powerful. So let's quickly dive into another bit more if we want to render something conditionally. So inside of my context, I'm going to create state. So I'm going to import the use state hook inside of, because this is just a normal component and we can use anything in here. Later we'll use the use reducer, and this will enable us to create the state management system. So I'm going to set this auth equals to false. So I'm going to destructure this array destructuring. And inside here I have isAuth and set just like this. So now I can pass this isAuth variable into my value. So I can say isAuth, and this value is equal to the isAuth up here, just like this. So I can actually, because of ES6, I can remove that and just pass that in. So now when I go to my home page, I want to render this home page color based on if isAuth is true or false. So now I can go into the home page and I can say where this div, I can once again get access to this isAuth by the same context, and I can style this div based on, I can say background color based on that variable from the global state. Background, I can say isAuth, if this is true, I would like to set the background equal to green, else set the background equal to red. So if I save this, we can see it is red now because the value of isAuth in the app state is actually false. So if I set this to true now and I save, we can see it turns to green. So this is an amazing way of handling state globally. It's not inside of the actual home page component, but you can handle it now. Now you can do different things. I want to render if is authenticated. I want to render a button and that says log out. And what this button will do, on click, we want to change the state from isAuth from true to false. So in order to do this, we have to go to our state and pass in this function that is passed from the use state into our value as well. So I can say set is auth. So you can see it's a different color. It's this orange color. This means it's a function that is passed through the context as well. So we can even pass functions through the context, which is amazing. So now we can go in here and destructure the isAuth, and now I can use that right over here. Set isAuth, and I can set this equal to false, just like this. And if I save this, else, if this is the case and it is not true, I want to render a different button, and this button will be a login button, which just triggers the set state once again. The set is auth state. So I want to do this again, but I want to set this equal to true. And we can name this login. So if I save this, we can see it is currently logged in because it's green, and it renders a log out button. So now I can say log out, and it turns it red, and it renders the different buttons. And this is how we can globally share state between components and manipulate this. So with this out of the way, we are really on the way to understanding in great detail how context can be used for global state management with the useReducer hook and the useContext hook. So with this out of the way, let's go check how this will work in a bigger application together. Okay, so now that we are done with the useReducer hook and the useContext hook, and we know how they work, let's combine them into this very basic to-do application. So in this application, I'm going to go a bit quicker through the code because I already explained some of the nitty-gritty stuff. So basically, this is just a simple to-do application. I will be able to type in something here and say add to-do, and then it would add it down here below. I just added a dummy one so we can see how it looks. Then I would be able to toggle the to-do complete or not complete, and it will change the text color. And then I will be able to delete the to-do. So it's really basic. So let's dive right into it. I'm gonna start just going through what I have here. I have a to-do input, which is this top part over here. This is its own component, and then the bottom part here is the to-do list component. And inside of the to-do list, I have a to-do item, which is this rendered component right over here. So let's start by creating our context. So once again, I like going into the source folder and creating a context folder. And inside this context folder, I usually start off by creating 4 context files. So in this application, because it's only one context we're using, I'm going to put everything in files inside of the context folder. Otherwise, you can break it down into different folders as well for different types of context. So let's start. I'm gonna make to-do-context and make this JS file. And this is just gonna be that 3 lines of code. So it's going to be import from React, and we're going to import create context. And then I initialize this in a variable, create context, and then I export default like this, and just export the context. So with this done, we can save, and we are done with this file. We can close this, we can close the app one as well. And inside the context folder, I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to call this to-do state.js. And this would be the actual context component that is going to be rendered. So I'm going to say RAFCE, create a functional component, and I'm going to import the context I created. So I'm going to call it to-do context with a capital letter, because I'm going to render it as a component. And then I can place it in here, say to-do context.provider, and insert the values. So for now, I'm not going to have any values in here. I'm just going to do it as follows. We'll get to the values in just a sec. And then just add the props.children. Just like this. So with that out of the way, we are done with this state. And now I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to call this to-do-reducer.js. So I like naming my, separating my reducer and my context, because this kind of gives it a Redux-like feeling, and Redux has really good best practices to follow. So inside the reducer, if you remember from the use reducer, it's basically just a function. So we can say const to do reducer and set this equal to a function, and this function will take in two parameters, and this will be the state and some action. And then we'll have a switch statement that will be used to check the types of each action. And then we'll just export this function, export default to do reducer, just like this. So with this all done, we are pretty much well on the way. So we don't have to import this. I did this by accidentally imported. So the last thing I like to do is create in the reducer, when we dispatch the string identifiers, I like to follow the best practice of creating actions. So to do /actions.js, and here I create constants that just helps for making the string identifiers easier to import and manage between the reducer and the context. So here I can say add to do. We're going to have some string identifier to add a to do. So I'm just going to copy that exactly into this right here. So in the use reducer example, this would have been increment and decrement. So I'm just setting it equal to this variable so I can get IDE functionalities to just import this, so I don't have to worry about spelling mistakes. So another one is going to be toggle the to do, and the last one is going to be export const delete to do, like this. Good. So with this done, I'm done with the actions. So now I can use these actions and import them inside of my reducer. So I can say import something from the to-dos actions. So now I can pull out those actions. I can say add to do, see I get IDE formatting for it. Toggle to do and delete to do. So now I can go and check for the following things. I can case it is add to do. I can do the following. I'm not going to do anything now because we have to set up the state first. I'm just creating the boilerplate. And then we can check for toggle to do. And then return the state. And then I can check for delete to do. And then check for, and then manipulate the state. And then the last one is the default. And here I will just return the state like this. So our reducer is almost done. Let's go back to our context. Let's go back to our context component we're creating, and in here we use the use reducer hook to reference to this use reducer. So we can use reducer, import the hook from this to do state. So this is where the context is being used. So in here we can import this use reducer, and we can import this reducer file. So this one over here, this function which we export down here. So we can say to do reducer from /the reducer file, just like that. Now we can use this use reducer and give it this to do reducer. So inside of this function, I can create my initial state and set this equal to to-dos, which is just going to be an array of to-dos. And a to-do will look like this. We'll say it has an ID, and this will be some number, and then it will have a text, which would be some text, which specifies a to-do, and then we'll have a complete key value pair, which will be set to false initially, and this will toggle if it is completed or not. So this is how an individual to-do will look inside of the array. So now we can create this use reducer. So we can say use reducer and pass it in that reducer function, the to-do reducer, and this initial state. And this will destructure into an array const, and we'll get two things from it. We'll get this state and we'll get this dispatch function. And it's important to name it like this. Okay, so once we've done that, now we're almost basically done. So we're going to want to have three functions that we place inside of this values. So in the value, we're already going to put in the to-dos, and this to-dos will come from the state. Because remember, now we are using the use reducer to manage our state. So in the previous example of the use context, we had a use state inside of our to-dos, and we just passed that in. So now we're going to use this state. So in order to get this to-dos, which is passed in as initial state here, we can say state.todos. And then the three functions we're going to need is one to add a to-do. The other one is to toggle a to-do. And the last one is delete a to-do. And you can create one for editor to do, but for simplicity and for length of this video, I'm not going to do that. So now we can create this. We can say const add to do is the function name, which is making an arrow function. And this function will receive the actual to do, which we'll send from the to-do input. Okay, so here we'll only do one thing. We'll dispatch this function over here, and we'll dispatch to our reducer an object which has a type. And here we can import the string identifiers as well. So we can import from action to do actions, and we can import the add to do, the toggle to do, and the delete to do. So now I will dispatch a type of add to do, and I will give it a payload of that to do I get in the function. So wherever I would call this function inside of my application, I would pass it some to do, and this to do I will pass as payload to my reducer to add it to my state. So this should make sense from the previous examples of how this flow works. And this would be the same for toggle to do, but instead of getting the actual to do, we get a to do ID, which will compare to the state ID over here to determine which one of the to-dos in the array we have to toggle this complete for. So here we'll dispatch the type of toggle to do, and you can see the IDE formatting it gives me, which is pretty helpful. So I don't have to type in it myself, and I'll pass in as payload this to do ID I got from the function. And then the last function is the delete function, delete to do function, which also will only take in some ID. And here I'll do exactly the same. I'm just going to copy this dispatch over here, and it will be exactly the same, except for the string identifier will now be delete to do instead of toggle to do. With this done, I have all three of my functions that will dispatch my types and my payloads to my reducer. Now I just have to give my context access to these functions, so I can pass them in down here. Add to do, you can see they're orange, toggle to do, and then delete to do, just like this. So now the final step to do to get this context to our application is to wrap our entire application with this context state. So we're going to import the to-do state, which is this component, and then we're going to wrap our application in this context. So you can say context, to-do state, or not this one, to-do state, just like that. And now we can wrap our entire application that needs access to this, to the context in this to-do state component, just like this. So with this out of the way, we're basically on the way of completing our application. As I said, I'm going really quickly. If you don't understand, you can just go through it again slowly, but it should all make sense after the other two examples. So now that we are done with our context, I'm just going to make this smaller. Our context, we are pretty much done here. We have our state, which is basically only this. And let's see, okay, That's all good. All good. Okay, so with that done, we can close this up and we can go to our reducer function. So this is where we have to think about how the logic will work when we have to add a to-do, toggle a to-do, and remove a to-do. So let's first add a to-do and see if that works. So we get the state, which is that initial state variable that is passed into the use reducer in the context file or in the app state file. So here we spread the state, and then we go to the to-dos array, and we want to add a new array with a new to-do. So we create an array and we spread the current to-dos. So this is how the spread operator would work. We'll spread the current to-dos the same as this. We'll spread a new array with the current to-dos that is already in our to-dos array, and we'll add the new one that was sent on the action.payload. So we can say action.payload. So this will have the new formatted to-do. So with this done, we're basically done with add to-do. So let's see if this works. So let's go to our input to-do input file, and over here we want to use the context now. So we firstly have to import the use context hook and import that context file. So we can say to-do context from outside completely like this, and we import this to-do context. Then we initialize this context by saying array destruction use context, and we pass it this to-do context, just like this. And now we can pull out all the functions or all the things we need for the input. So for the input, we only need the add to do function. So we can just pull it out like this, add to do. Now we have access to this add to do. And what this application does basically, it has a form with an onSubmit. And this onSubmit function is called up here. And basically all that happens is we take the to-do that is currently in the use state up here, so just what's inside of the text box, the two-way binding. Then we want, instead of console logging it to the console, we want to call this add to-do function and pass it the to-do. But before we do that, remember our to-do has this format where it's some ID and some text, and then some complete, which we set to false initially. So we have to format it here before we send it to our function. So let's create that new to-do, and this will have an ID. We're just going to set this ID to math.random, and then we're going to set the text equal to whatever is in this to-do, which refers to this input. So this input's value will be equal to the to-do. So we set the text equal to the to-do, and then the complete will automatically be set to false, because when you first create it, it's obviously not completed. And now this new object we created, we pass that into the add to do, and that would be catched by the context in this function, and then dispatch it to the reducer. So let's go check out if this works. So we have this current one in here. Okay, firstly, remember we are not loading the to-dos from our context. So let's go into the to-do list, into right over here. And here where I load this to-do item, I want to get access to the to-do array in our context. So here we're going to do exactly the same. We're going to say use context, and we want to import the context. So import to-do context. This is really repetitive, but it kind of brings the muscle memory and the point home of how this would work. So then we initialize the use context like this, and we pass it the to-do context. Then we object this structure out, and what we're going to need in this part of the application is a few things, basically all the other things. We're going to need the to-dos, we're going to need the toggle to-do, and we're going to need the delete to-do, because we're going to put an on-click listener on this component to toggle and delete the to-do. So now we got the actual to-dos from our context, so now we can do the following and say to-dos.map, and for each to-do I want to create a to-do component. So I can do this as follows. To-do item. And this item, if we go and check what this item gets as props, we would like the following things. We would like the text, and then, yeah, that's basically that. So we can destructure this as the text, and save this, and go here and just place in the actual to-do text right down there. And here we can pass it that text. This text will be equal to the actual to-do.text. And then when we create in this map function an individual component, each component should have a key to help React re-render the DOM correctly in the virtual DOM. So we can say to do and pass it that random ID. So now we're basically almost done. There's only two more things we need to do here, is pass it the toggle and the delete. So we're gonna have a click. When we click on this application, on this actual to do, we would like it to fire off some different functions. So I'm going to call this toggle, or let's say click toggle, click to toggle, and then another one, click to delete, like this. And then we'll pass in a few things. So before we do these two, let's just quickly check if this works. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my application, and you can see it's empty right now. So if I enter something here, make bed, and I just spell correctly, and I add it, I can see make bed was added to my to-do list. So this is awesome. There's no error checking, so if I were to add nothing, and it would create a blank one. But you can check that on your own. So now we want to handle the to-do and the toggle. So I'm just going to close up all of these. We actually have to still open the reducer. I haven't finished that yet. So let's go to the toggle and delete to do in the reducer. So right over here, we once again want to spread the state. So if we think about what we want to let happen when we toggle a to do, is we go into the to-dos in this state. And what we do is we say state.todos.map. So we want to go through each one of the to-dos, and wherever the to-do, the current to-do that is mapped, its ID is equal to the action.payload. So you will remember we send the to-do ID from the reducer function that is dispatched in the action payload. So if this is the case, I want to spread the current to do, so I want to recreate that current to do, and I want to change its complete value to whatever the current to do's complete value is. So if this doesn't make sense, I would suggest pausing and trying to understand what happens here. So we spread that current to do, so this to do that is mapped over, we take everything inside of it and place it inside the new object. Then we go to that complete object key value pair and we switch it, we negate it from what it currently is. So if it's true, we make it false. If it's false, we make it true. Otherwise, we just return the to-do. So it's as simple as this. Doing a diff ternary operator is very, very simple. Otherwise, you have to do some if and recreate it like this once again. And if we want to delete a to-do, we once again spread the state. And for this, it's important to spread the state because otherwise you don't get all your other to-dos back. So here I want to use the to-dos, and I want to say state.todos.filter. So now I want to filter through all of the to-dos, and if that to-do I'm filtering on is equal to the ID I pass in as dispatch, I don't want to add him into the new array. So basically filter creates a new array, which will help us eventually remove the actual value. So I can say here, if this to-do.id is not equal to the action.payload, I want to add him, I want to return. So everything that's not equal will be added to the new array, the rest will be left out. So if I save this and I am basically done now, I can leave that closed. I can go to my to-do items, and on this buttons, the toggle and the delete, I want to add an on click, and And here I'm going to get something from the props, which is going to be the click to toggle and click to delete functions. So I can just pass them right in like this. And this should be on click one as well. And then pass it in like this. So with this done, I can go to my list, and this should be the last things to do. And add a click to delete and pass it the toggle delete toggle to do function in right here. So we're going to create a function, anonymous function, and this function will run this, and then we'll pass it in this current to do that is being mapped. It will pass it its ID, so we can pass it in like this, and then we'll do the exact same thing. Copy this, we'll paste it in alongside, but instead of deleting, we'll add the toggle. I see I added the wrong function to the wrong one here, so I can actually just change this to toggle and keep this as delete, and then just pass in the delete to toggle, just like this. So now I have the delete and I have the toggle. So in order to see the difference in the toggle and the difference in the toggle of complete, we go to the actual item and we render the text of the span. So this spans text dynamically. So we can say style is equal and now we can pass in if it is complete or not. So we can pass it in the complete, and here we can say to do dot complete. So now we have access in this to do item to the complete, or to check if this item is actually complete. So you can use context in here as well to check this, but because it's only one level deep, it's easier to use it as props. So here we can say the style, so the color should, if complete, it should be equal to green. Else it should be red, just like this. So with this done, we can go back to our application. We can say make bed, and it is red. If I toggle it, it's green, back to red, like this. If I want to delete it, I just press delete and it's not there anymore. So make bed, red video, just like this. Both of them are red, just like this. Eat breakfast. And then I can delete them all the way. So this is how the use reducer and use context is used to create global state management.